Morning here in Australia. How is it over in the United States?
Well, hello, Debbie. It's a pleasure to join you and hope you're having a wonderful morning. It is evening here in the beautiful state of Colorado. I live in Colorado Springs, beautiful Rocky Mountains, and we're having a wonderful week. This is early mid-April, and we're already having like a beautiful 60s and 70-degree weather. So it's been just perfect.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So, Miss Shelley Brunswick, how did you get into the space industry?
Well, that's always a great question. And I always say I have a journey of three main chapters that kind of highlight that. And the first chapter was, right out of high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have college money and I didn't have a skill set. And, what do I want to do? So I didn't go to college right away. Instead, I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. And
Mm.
that was wonderful because the Air Force stationed me in Turkey and Germany and in Colorado. I learned a skill set. I learned how to be a personnel specialist. I earned college money. And even more important, I was able to go to school at night using a program called tuition assistance. And by going to school at night, I was able to complete my bachelor's and master's degrees, which allowed me to apply to become an officer in the U.S. Air Force, which I did. And that started the second part of my journey when I was selected to become an officer in the Air Force. I was selected to become a space program manager. And that really started my
Wow.
journey in the space industry that has now been 25 years. So the Air Force made the decision for me, and I'm super grateful because at first, when they asked me to, well, they didn't ask me, they told me, I said, I don't want to do this. And I tried to get reassigned back into personnel, which is what I was as an enlisted airman. I wanted to do what I knew. I wanted to be with the people I knew. But fortunately, the Air Force, they're not really asking you if you want to do something. They're kind of telling you. So I saluted smartly and I became a space program manager, and it's been an amazing adventure ever since. And I was in the Air Force for many years doing that, working on ground station and launch vehicles and on-orbit assets, which we'll call satellites, as well as being a professor at Defense Acquisition University, teaching about space project management, and then ultimately finishing my career in the Air Force, working on Capitol Hill, um, talking to members of Congress about the Air Force, the budget, the programs we needed. And so that's how I finished my career. And now in the Air Force, and now I'm on the third part of my journey, which is working here as the Chief Operating Officer at Space Foundation.
Oh. And so, how do you feel? Were you accepted as a female quite readily when you entered this profession?
I'm not really sure. I noticed a difference. When I enlisted in the Air Force in the 80s, I didn't, there were men and women that went through basic training. I was in an all-female flight of women going through. So personnel, the specialty there was men and women. And then when I became an officer, there was a bit of a change. I will say, there were less women in the industry, more men, but I never noticed a difference of being the only woman maybe in a room. Other people may have noticed I was the only woman in the room, but I was wearing a uniform just like everyone else. I was in the Air Force just like everyone else. And so that kind of leveled the playing field. And I was sitting at the table just like everyone else because at the end of the day, I was the one as the program manager listening to everybody so that we could come up with the best solutions to move forward to creating the emerging technologies in the space industry. So I never perceived it as a challenge. I do see that other individuals have had more challenges in their journey than I may have had, so I've been very fortunate. And so I think where we are today in the space industry has changed immensely from when I started 25 years ago. And I'm sure you've seen that with your expertise in technology. Now we're seeing a diversity of ages, men and women, regions of the world. The space industry is blooming, and the space industry is part of all emerging technologies. You and I had an earlier conversation about virtual reality and AI. We can talk about agriculture and pharmaceutical development and energy storage and 3D printing, all part of the space industry as well. So the space industry has grown, the diversity in the space industry has grown. And so it's a really exciting time where we are today. And I'm even excited and more excited to see where we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years with technology, but also how we're opening doors and allowing individuals who may have not perceived space or technology as something that was for them. They may have looked at that and said, oh, that's great, but that's not for me. That's not a career for me. Now they may say, that is a career for me. There is an opportunity for me in the space industry. And that's what my passion is really about, is I'm hoping that I'm creating role models so that the next generation, or even this generation, can see themselves and say, that's for me.
That's amazing. And I love that answer because I was speaking at a Probus group, which is an older Rotary group. Mm-hmm. And I was talking about space, and they're going, why would we want to spend so much money on space? And I'm going, but the amount of stuff that comes out of the research and development, it's not just for space. It's for the, you could almost say you're solving problems that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have. And you're researching and doing, developing things that will benefit humankind. So they had to wrap their heads around that a little bit. So I love your answer just then. And how have you sort of progressed from, so you've gone from the Air Force into public, I guess. Was that because I know there's quite a few people haven't adapted quite well going from, military or Air Force, whatever, to the public life. How was that for you?
Well, overall, it was a smooth transition. I was already working on Capitol Hill, working to secure the budget for the Air Force and the programs. So I was wearing civilian clothes at that time. I wasn't wearing a uniform. And similar to what you and I've talked about, it's really about modifying your language and speech to meet the needs of the audience. And so in the military, we can speak in a lot of acronyms, and we have a lot of ways we talk. But when you're meeting with other people, you have to make it so that your message is understood. And that means you need to not talk in that military jargon. You need to talk in very plain ways, why we need programs, why it costs this. And one of the best things I learned working on Capitol Hill was to take people out to see the mission, to meet the people and to see what they were doing, to provide that better understanding. So that's the other thing. How can you help people understand what you're trying to articulate, especially if they come from very different backgrounds? And people who work on Capitol Hill, and I'm sure the same in Australia and other nations' governments, everybody wants to do what's best for the country, what's best for citizens, but we all have different perspectives and understanding. And so we all have to come together and then understand, how can we move forward successfully together? So I was fortunate that I worked in a career field, program management, where I worked with a diversity of people. I worked not only with other military people, but civilians who worked for the military. I worked with defense contractors. I worked with NASA. And then working on Capitol Hill, I worked with a very different group of people that may have not had any military background. So the transition piece was somewhat simple and then somewhat challenging. And what I mean by that is, the Space Foundation is an amazing organization that is a U.S. nonprofit doing business internationally for educational programs and information. But coming from a military, you're very focused on mission. Everybody is on a certain mission. And when you leave that mission type focus, where everyone's focused on the same collective teamwork, it's very challenging to go into a civilian workforce or a commercial workforce where it may be very different. And the profit motive may be different, although in the Air Force, it may not have been profit, but it was successfully securing a budget or ensuring your program didn't get canceled. But, understanding the differences in personalities and office politics and how do you get things done. In the military, I just say, hey, Debbie, I need you to do this. And I'm not really asking you. And so you have to learn, it's really important. They call them soft skills, but I call them essential skills. Communication, collaboration, empathy, listening to others. Sometimes when we come out of the military, those skills may not be as strong as they should be maybe in some corporate worlds. And so I learned a lot about that as well. Fortunately, I had a great role model. We have a wonderful chief financial officer here at Space Foundation. She's been here over 30 years. And so she was a great mentor when I would say, I'd go to her and I'd say, that didn't kind of go the way I wanted it. And she goes, well, maybe you want to try it this way. So she had a really good way of helping me be less military, not in a bad sense, just in an understanding of how do I now connect with this new team that I'm with. And you and I talked about that earlier as well, about understanding other perspectives and reading the room and understanding, are they understanding your message? Are you connecting with them? And that's one of the things I'm passionate about as I write about leadership is authenticity. Authenticity is about, sharing your message, being passionate about it, being authentic. It's part of your DNA. It's who you are. You're genuine, but it's also about being able to connect with other people. And when you can connect with other people, that's when you can build trust and credibility. And ultimately, that's when you can move the mission or your company's goals and objectives forward, is when you build that authenticity and you build those relationships of trust.
Yeah, and it also brings, to me, it brings happiness to your life, because you've developed these relationships, and that is life. We have so much horrible media and whatever around us. We're bombarded with negativity, but when you're developing a relationship, it's so important and touching. Thank you. Can we, just before we go, can we talk about how did Space Foundation start?
Wonderful. Well, Space Foundation is turning 40 this year. So that tells you how far back our founding fathers thought about Space Foundation. So Space Foundation is a U.S. nonprofit that does business internationally through 3 main divisions. And our first division is our Symposium 365, your trusted place for events. So one of our largest events is taking place next week, where we are going to bring 13,000 or more people from around the world together to talk about the future of space. And that will include military, civil, commercial, international, over 40 international delegations, academia, more than 15 heads of space agencies, military space, to talk together. We're also going to be doing a workforce panel or a workforce day, where we're going to talk about how do we build the workforce for the future. So that's our Symposium 365, your trusted place for events. We then have our Center for Innovation and Education, and that's all about that lifelong learning. That's all about kindergarten through 12th grade and creating those opportunities for primary school, middle school, high school, teacher professional development. But then also we have, through our Space Commerce Institute, adult non-accredited programming, and that it relates to entrepreneurial facilitation. How do entrepreneurs get into the space industry? We also look at putting programs together for universities to talk about what is the space ecosystem, because right now it's $469 billion. 77% of that is commercial. And between now and 2030, that'll be $1 trillion. And by 2040, over $3 trillion. So the growth is exponential, and where we need those innovators and entrepreneurs to commercialize that space technology, like you talked about. NASA has thousands of patents that are waiting to be commercialized. So our Center for Innovation and Education is all about that lifelong learning. Kindergarten through 12th grade, teacher professional development, but then adult facilitation. How do we empower adults who might want to be entrepreneurs or reskill and come into the space industry? And then our third division is called Global Alliance, and it's all about those partnerships, building partnerships here in the US with our government agencies and industries and academia, but also building them internationally with other organizations around the world. And so those are our 3 divisions: Symposium 365, Center for Innovation and Education, and Global Alliance. Now, as you can imagine, 40 years ago, we didn't start this way.
No.
40 years ago, our first symposium, so I said we're anticipating over 13,000 people will come to our symposium next week. 40 years ago, our first symposium was about 250 people, because our role was to facilitate Space Command, a division of the U.S. Air Force in the military of the U.S., with the industry that could build those space applications. We were that facilitator, 250 people. And so, as you can see, as space has evolved, the Space Foundation has grown to evolve with it.
That's amazing. And so, if you could give us one little glimpse of the future, what do you think will be the biggest space thing in the future?
Well, I think the biggest thing in the future is change. You know, if there's any one constant, it's change. You know, everyone, and I know that wasn't your question. I'm going to come back to it, but many times I hear people say, well, we're going to go back to the normal. We're going to go back pre-COVID. We're going to do this. And you know what? There is no normal. It's only what is today and what will be the next challenge tomorrow, because the world continues to change. So I think one thing we all have to do is we all have to be better at adapting to change and being part of that change, because with artificial intelligence, as we're seeing with ChatGPT and everything, AI, VR, and all these machine learning is going to create change more rapidly than we've ever seen before. So as human beings, we want to be adaptable. So we adapt to that change and continue to grow with it, just like the Space Foundation has. What do I see in the space industry? The same thing. Rapid growth, rapid change with all this technology. Yes, we will return to the moon and go on to Mars and continue to explore the universe. We will have a cislunar economy, which is between Earth and the moon. But what we're also going to see is that technology transition back to Earth, and having amazing entrepreneurs and investors that will unlock that technology to benefit us here on Earth. Because for the challenges we have on Earth, we know, as we talked about, climate change, the Sustainable Development Goals, we do need technology solutions for those, and space is one of the players in creating those solutions. So those are some of the great things I see. And so what I really hope to see in the future is that people become more aware of how space is impacting our daily lives.
And I think for me, especially coming from Australia, when we talked about space singularity in 2016, the first thing I thought of was, and we were talking about mining asteroids, which to a normal person that sounds preposterous, but but we, especially my state, is a very big mining state.
Yes,
And
it
as we move out of, you know, fossil fuels and etc., or whatever, the need for mining coal is going to diminish very in the next 10 years. It's just going to, you know, but we have all that knowledge and technology. So these big companies really should, I don't know whether they are now, but they really should be, they should have started thinking about this 10 years ago, about using that knowledge to mine asteroids, to find, you know, new, it could be new metals, it could be anything really, to tell you the truth. And we have that already.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it's such a huge opportunity, such a huge opportunity. It is very much science fiction. I don't disagree with that, but it is possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, they are looking at, so asteroid mining, I was talking to somebody about that earlier, but that technology is a little further off. Not even the mining. I'm just talking the getting to an asteroid, landing on an
Yeah,
asteroid, drilling on
it's
an
going very fast.
asteroid,
Yeah,
lifting off from an asteroid, or bringing that asteroid into the Earth or the moon's orbit. So there's a lot of technology that relates very different. But there are companies that are looking at asteroid mining, and they are talking to individuals from Australia or Chile or other countries that do a lot of mining to capture that knowledge from those experts. Because right now, the best people to talk to about mining an asteroid or mining the moon or Mars are people who are in the mining industry here on Earth.
yeah. So that
So
it's
we
just that
so we need to capture that
yeah,
technology, and we need to help those, and those individuals, as you said, maybe they lose their jobs, you know, as we mine less on planet Earth, but there's a new future for them to reskill into. I don't expect any of them to launch to an asteroid to mine it, but what we might mine it with is robots,
yeah.
right?
It
We
would
have
be
rovers
remote.
already,
Mm.
artificial intelligence, virtual reality. You put your visors on. Are you on the robot that's on the asteroid mining? I mean, we need to really change our paradigm of what the future of work could look like, how that could be beyond this planet, and then how do we reskill people to realize that jobs will change, technology is going to come on board, your job's not going to go away, but
Yeah,
it's going to change. And
change.
yes, it's going to change.
And I said last night, I was talking, of all people, to the new. I went to a multi-faith dinner last night, so I was sitting next to a rabbi, and we were talking about AI. And I said, look, work will always be hybrid. You can never take the human element out. Personally, that's what I think.
Yeah.
You can never take the human element out because people have tried and it hasn't worked. There's many cases where people have tried to automate it completely and it just has not worked because there's always little things that will happen. So it's always, for me, the hybrid work will always be the future. Hybrid.
I agree.
Yeah. So
I mean,
I think we just need to get the word out because people are very, very fearful of automation, robotics, AI. And we just need to quash that fear and just say, look, there's so many exciting things happening. Just enjoy it.
exactly. And how do you learn from it? How do you learn? And so one of my simple examples I like to share is the car mechanic. 30 years ago, you had a problem with your car, you took it to the mechanic, maybe you left it a week, maybe you got it back fixed, maybe you didn't. Now you go take your car to the mechanic pulls out a computer, plugs your car into the computer, your car tells the computer what's wrong with it, and then the mechanic fixes it. The mechanic's job did not go away. The mechanic's job just became far more efficient and effective. And maybe your car, instead of being there a week and you hope you fix the right thing, it now became, you fix the right thing, and maybe you don't have a car for a day or a few hours. And it also made the mechanic's time far more efficient too. So technology changed the mechanic's job, but didn't change the mechanic from having a job. And I think that's how we need to have people evaluate, what does ChatGPT and all this AI mean and this machine learning? How will it help adapt our jobs so that instead of spending a week, I'm using this as a metaphor, you spend a week hopefully finding the problem on a car. Instead, you know what the problem is and you can resolve it in an hour. It'll allow us to become way more efficient and use our time wisely than using it at things that may not be as efficient. So it's more about the mind frame of how we look at using these tools. And at the end of the day, that is what human beings are. We have always used tools, right? We can look back in our history. We need to look at ChatGPT and AI and machine learning as just another form of a tool. It's just a very different tool than the tools we've used in the past. And so, and then how do we adapt and use that tool efficiently to help us?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I say to people. I mean, just think of it as a tool. I think, and that's probably the easiest way to explain technology to people. Just use it as a tool. You use a fork and a knife. just use it as a tool. Well, thank you for your time. It's been wonderful and amazing. That your background is truly amazing and very inspirational.
Well, thank you so much. I'm grateful I got to interview you as well. Your background is amazing and inspirational. So I love that we each got to share each other's journey and hear more about each other, because when we listen to other people, then we're able to elevate them and their stories. And when we elevate others, we ultimately elevate ourselves.
But I still think I'm the little girl from Surfers Paradise in Australia and in my little town. So thank you for those words.
You're very welcome. And I look forward to seeing you around the galaxy.
Yes, thank you.